I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Christina Studebaker, Community Impact Coordinator with United Way, and I think I know most of you on the call. But thank you for joining us this evening to have a great discussion with Steve Jenkins. But I'm going to go over some information about the agenda and logistics of how we're thinking this will work, since this is our first one. But before I do that, I just wanted to provide some information, some background information. Given who's on this meeting, who's logged in, this might be known to all of you already, but just in case it's not, and to just give us some important context, I just wanted to go over some stats. And so according to the US Census, there are more than 1,000 children in Door County under the age of 5, and all of them require childcare. So we want all of our children to be safe and cared for each day. But in addition to that, the time between birth and 5 is important, because it's when a child's brain is undergoing incredible, amazing development. The first 3 years are an especially sensitive time for development, and it's estimated, I've heard different numbers, but I even selected a number that's on the low end, is that an estimated 700 new neural connections are being made every second. And so that's more than 2.5 million new neural connections every hour. And that's a conservative estimate. So that's an amazing amount of brain development that's going on. And so when we talk about, we often hear the term child care, but we want to make sure that we expand that. We're trying to expand that discussion and our concept that it's also early childhood education, because that is also what is going on, whether it's intentional or not. Kids' brains are developing, so we'd like to be intentional and thoughtful about the environments that they're in and the care that they're receiving. So by age 5, a child's brain has developed 90%, and a young child's daily experiences determine which brain connections develop. So it's like whatever is used, that is how it's getting wired. So positive, engaging experiences with parents and caregivers are truly important and impactful. And they promote positive, engaging experiences, promote healthy brain development. And if your experiences don't have those things, your brain still develops, but it develops in a different way. So of course, we want to provide the best foundation that we can for the kids in our community. We're fortunate in Door County to have high quality childcare, and that's provided by both group centers and home-based providers. But we know that many families still face significant challenges when it comes to childcare. Some families are unable to find the care they need during the hours that they need or at locations that are workable. Some families struggle to afford care, and for others, it's just simply unaffordable. But the flip side of that is that child care providers also face financial challenges. So caring and educating young children is labor intensive. And the younger the children are, the lower the ratio of a child care provider to the kids. So that all of those things contribute so that salaries are a significant driver of child care costs. And in light of the number of providers it takes, or that's regulated to provide care for young children, child care provider wages are generally low. And in Wisconsin, child care provider wages typically fall in the range of $10 to $15 an hour. So this dilemma is often referred to as the trilemma in this field. And there's 3 things: affordability of child care and education, the quality of the child care and education, and then workforce costs all compete with one another. And in Door County, we're keenly aware of this dilemma. And sadly, we're not alone. Thousands of communities across the United States are dealing with this challenge, and the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the crisis that many child care providers were already facing pre-COVID. So without a universal child care system or larger government subsidies for early child care and education, each community has to come up with its own approach that's going to work for the community and be sustainable. And that's what we are doing in Door County. We're having intentional conversations about child care, looking to the long-term sustainable future of providing affordable, high-quality child care and different options across the community, because we know families need options to best meet their needs. So these are important conversations to have. It takes a lot of effort. United Way started working with this in February, having community conversations, and we formed our child care community task force. And that work has continued during this time over these weeks. A couple weeks ago, we had virtual showings of a documentary called No Small Matter, which everyone who sees it is so impressed by it. And we had virtual showings, but now we have DVDs available in our office. And so if you had difficulty connecting, you were getting kicked off internet, or you wanted to share that film with friends or families, contact me, and we're putting together some sort of old school library checkout system for the DVDs, if you even still have a DVD player, but that's okay. It's a great film and I highly recommend it. So we want to get it out there. So then after that, with those virtual showings, we're paired with some discussion panels of local experts talking about the various aspects of our child care system. But that just scratched the surface. And so now we wanted to follow that up with a series of town hall meetings that allow us to have a deeper dive into particular topics and have community discussion to both educate and hear from the community. So it really is a discussion, it's a conversation back and forth, and that's the point of this. And so Steve Jenkins with Door County Economic Development has been very gracious to be our kickoff speaker for these town hall meetings. Thank you, Steve. And if you have questions, we're gonna start with Steve talking, but he's happy to take questions while he's talking and address a question as it comes up. So I'll be monitoring the chat box and I can interrupt Steve. And then we also have planned to have 25 minutes or so discussion at the end, just pure Q&A. So if I don't get to a question, accidentally miss something, we'll circle back around to it during the question and answer period. But we thank you all for joining us. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Steve.
Thank you, Christina. I enjoy the ability to have conversations like this, because I believe that we're facing an issue that we can no longer ignore or think that it's not solvable, so we just run away from it. I believe all things have solutions, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I've been in economic development now for almost 46 years. And as you can tell, I've lost my hair through that process. But childcare has been around for a while. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago, it really became an issue for the economic development profession. So before I get into that, I want to ask each of you to give me a word that describes childcare in Door County right now.
Do you want that in the chat box, or you want people
No,
to
just
shout
out a word. Unmute yourself and shout a word out.
Limited.
Needed.
Lacking.
Challenging.
Quality.
Crisis.
Who just
Grace.
said Who just said crisis?
I did. Spencer did.
Spencer, you're right on the mark. This is a crisis in Door County. It's a crisis in this state, and it's a crisis nationally. And it's simply because it comes down to access and cost, and that results in the fact that it's now an economic development crisis. The economic development field never looked at these things as being in their purview or their influence realm at all. And now all of a sudden we are faced with different types of struggles in our communities for those communities to see and experience prosperity and sustaining that prosperity. So in essence, what we're finding, childcare as it relates to economic development, is that it's a workforce issue. And it's a workforce issue on two levels. And Christina alluded to one of those. First, it impacts the ability for people to work, to have a job. They find themselves having to make a decision many times. Do I work, or do I stay home and let my spouse be the breadwinner? And as we know in today's world, that's really tough. This is a world where you almost have to have two incomes in order to enjoy the things that you would like to enjoy and provide for your family. It's also a workforce issue in the sense that's your future workforce. And that early learning is going to influence the ability to work in an increasingly technical world. You've got to be able to do things differently today than we did 10 years ago. And I say that it's going to be much different coming out of this COVID crisis that we're in. We're going to be facing a different world, a different economy, and we're going to have to adjust and adapt to those things. It's here. It's not going to go away. And I think that for us not to deal with it is a major shortcoming of any community as it relates to economic development. And the reason I'm adamantly supporting whatever we can do to solve this issue. We no longer can expect Washington or even Madison to address our needs. We have to do those on a local level. And I think that's one of the things we're going to find coming out of this health crisis that we find ourselves in, which has resulted in a deep economic crisis, is it's going to be up to us. It's going to be up to communities to solve these issues. I came across an interesting quote that kind of underscores all of this, and that is, and it came from a publication. The title of the article was Childcare as an Economic Development Strategy. While women do seem to be particularly affected by children and childcare, this issue affects entire households. As gender roles are shifting, father figures are likely also to be sensitive to the issue of childcare in their work choices. One of the things when I'm looking at who's attending today's session is there's very few men involved with this discussion. That's got to change. And it's got to change not simply because they may be impacted, as this quote stated, but it is their responsibility. It's all of us, not just one gender, it's both genders. This issue has been around a long time. And as I said, it just came to the forefront. So we have new infrastructures for economic development. In the past, it was water and sewer and airports and industrial parks. Today, added to that mix, and really kind of more important, includes broadband. And as we know, we have issues here. Some people have to ride around their car to get service. It includes affordable housing, and that's an issue for us, and that issue is growing in its magnitude. And then childcare. These are the new infrastructures for economic development. So if we expect, and we certainly desire, that we're going to have economic success in Door County, it's not going to happen without addressing these issues. That's a given. As a nation, we have tried solving this issue of childcare, child education for decades. And I'm here to say, with a few exceptions, we continue to have the issue, but it's growing now. We're not solving the issue. And it's hard. Let's face it, access and cost, those two things don't necessarily meld together very well in today's world. And so it's like, well, which one do you want? You want access at low cost, or you want low cost and limited access? How do you want the formula to work? Well, I'm here to say you can't have it that way. You've got to figure out how to address all those issues. These are life impacting issues. Childcare is life impacting. And we've heard it from people who said it's life changing, it's life impacting. And it does affect their ability to prosper as a family. It impacts their ability to prosper as individuals. It has a significant impact today, and it will be moving forward on our economic viability as a community. Currently, the majority of our employers in Door County, doesn't make any difference what sector they're from, are desperate for workers. We have many openings across this county in all sectors, and they can't find workers. Part of the issue is something has shifted in the last year to 2 years. But some will tell you, particularly on the manufacturing side, I have people who say they can't get childcare and they got to stay home. Somebody has to stay home and take care of those children until they enter school. So we have that. We have the fact that we're a peninsula, therefore we're geographically challenged. We have a workforce that, unless we grow it locally and capture it early, is going to come from our south, and it's going to be a commuting workforce. And even that's changing. And so how do we address all these issues? How do we piece this together in a cohesive strategy for our community's future? This issue of access and cost has become very strained. Many parents are having to make that decision about, do I work or do I stay home? Moving forward, it's going to be necessary for us to explore and even chase after innovative and creative solutions in order to assure that we have sustainable childcare systems that are affordable, reliable, and of the highest quality for our residents and our children. These children, no matter what their social economic background or condition in which they live, are born into, are our future. That's the best investment we can make, is in those children. And as Christina alluded to, those early years, 5 and under, will set in motion those children's future and therefore our future as a community. Research over the decades has shown that those first 3 years are so crucial. Yet we don't pay enough attention to the needs of the children during those years. I think it's appalling that we expect to have quality childcare when we pay child care providers less than what they deserve and what they need, both in terms of function in the child care arena, but how do you attract quality people into that child care arena? You don't do it by paying McDonald's wages. For some reason, we underpay the very people that we ought to be paying more to because they affect our children's future very early in their lives. You know, I've seen this in my whole career, and it doesn't make any difference if it's childcare or some other issue. We always expect somebody else is going to address the problem. It's somebody else's problem, not mine. Although I may have kids, but I want the childcare problem to be addressed by someone else, the United Way or the Community Foundation. It doesn't make any difference. It can no longer be that attitude. It cannot exist. We cannot solve the problem. We cannot come to a solution when we have the attitude that it's someone else's problem. It will take innovative solutions. It will take out of the box thinking, and it involves that 4-letter word called risk. Everything today has a risk factor to it. And that risk factor changes almost on a daily basis. It will take dedicated collaboration, cooperation, and investment from both the public and the private sector. No single entity has all the answers, but working together, we're going to be able to solve this issue. But it's also going to take us taking those risks and making some investments in our future. And that involves some of the employers. They need to step up. For so long, I've heard the same problem or same issue around this problem. It's not my problem. I'm not in the child care business. My employees need it, but I'm not in that business. And so somebody else handle it. They have got to be at the table and they got to be vested in solving the problem. It can't be just the child care providers. This is not someone else's problem. It's our problem as a community. And as a result, it's up to us to solve the problem. It's not insurmountable. Yes, it's difficult. There are so many issues around providing quality child care at an affordable cost and making it available no matter what your social economic status is. One thing I want to mention is because of some of those issues, it's also an equity issue. The affluent don't have this problem. But that problem that the less affluent have are our problems. And they're dependent upon us to find a solution for this issue long term. It is an economic development issue because it has a direct bearing on a community's ability to prosper, both on a community-wide corporate level, but also each and every citizen, particularly those who have children. We no longer can expect it to be solved by somebody else. It's our problem. Let's find the solutions, and we can do that. But it's going to take dedicated work and collaboration of everyone. It's everybody's problem. So that's my comments. I'm interested in what you have to say, because as an economic developer, those perspectives are critical for us making decisions about how to move forward and address this issue, along with affordable housing, along with broadband, plus all the other stuff that we have to do. Your input's important. So I'm interested in hearing what you have to say as it relates to this issue.
Thank you, Steve. And I just want to let people know, I think we have a small enough group. It's a nice sized group, but it's small enough that we can accommodate people just unmuting rather than navigating through the chat box. But if for some reason it's easier or more convenient for someone to go through the chat box, we can do that too. But
You know, I would say this is Margie. I'm someone who's actually been in all parts of the trilemma. I went to school, formal schooling, college, and early childhood education. About the same time frame you started working in workforce development, economic development, Steve. I worked in inner city. I ran my own programs. And the workforce caused for me, I couldn't continue to work 3 jobs and have a life. So I pivoted and went into corporate America, and I've remained, I'm no longer in that, I'm self-employed, but I've been passionate about this since the age of 20. And I actually think even for the affluent, one part of that trilemma still exists, and that's the affordable wages for the people who do the work. Even the affluent who pay a one-off person or find a pod to put their kids in, often the providers of that are still struggling to have a life. So some parts of it are easier for them. I just think it's very, very complex, and no part of that trilemma gets a pass on it. I would also say, you know, your comment about people struggle with this until their kids get to school. It's interesting. I think it was a New York Times today said the undiscussable word is public schools provide childcare. When school is canceled, when there's a snow day, when it's summer, when there's a teacher in-service day, parents with kids through the age of 6th or 7th grade scramble. So to think that the need to think about this stops the minute a child enters pre-K, every day is still easier, and some of the societal burden is just picked up by the fact of where your child spends 8:30 to 3:30 during September through May. So there's a big part of me that thinks of this in terms of our communities pay for public school and they expect good schooling in return, but also one part of what they're paying for is a safe place for kids to be pre-K through 6, 7, 8, whatever age range, school range, a family feels okay with their child being unsupervised full time. But there's something about, if we believe that little brains, who are the compound effect of what they're learning every waking moment of their life for the first 5 years, matters. And if that is indeed learning, why wouldn't we think of that more holistically from birth to age 18? How do we give our future need for competent, confident citizenry what they need from their day they're born? And in that way, it also helps parents be able to provide a livelihood. There's just that's just some of the ways I think about it. I'll pause. I can talk on this forever, and I will stop.
Actually, there are some communities that are beginning to ask that same question. Shouldn't this be a holistic from birth on through graduation from high school? What really kind of stops that conversation is that dollar mark.
Of course.
Because, and then everybody freezes, and then it dies. The conversation just dies. It doesn't continue to move forward to a point where you say, but are there ways to get around that? Are there ways to address it? They just stop the conversation. And I think that's part of our problem, is that we let those things that traditionally have stood in the way of solving problems, i.e. money, once that comes up, it's like pouring cold water all over a conversation. Instead of continuing to move forward with the conversation, saying there's a solution, let's work to find the solution. And it's not in just childcare. I see it in a lot of other things. You know, the broadband. I mean, the answer to broadband for Door County, and I don't mean to get off on the subject, but it's similar. Yeah. Speak up. No. You know, the answer to our broadband issues here is fiber. And so when you start talking about fiber, what comes up?
Rock.
Oh my gosh, it's going to cost a lot of money. But in reality, it doesn't really cost that much money, because we look at it in a micro sense. And so we see it in our own little world, but in terms of the solution, it pays for itself. So instead, we're looking for these stopgap solutions driven by grants, and most of it is wireless, and that doesn't work well in certain areas. And the further north you go, the more challenging it becomes. So we let the dollar mark stop us dead in our tracks from moving forward with a solution. And so it happens in a lot of things. It's going to cost us too much money. When we need to start asking a question, what's it costing us not to solve the problem? What's that societal cost for us not solving the child care issue?
And I will follow up on that, Steve. And I know, Jane, you had something to say, but just what ties into that really well is that you talked about a growing workforce coming from the South. The alternative is that we will have an exodus of families from our county to the South, and there goes the community prosperity. So that's potentially what it costs us.
And that is a very real threat. And we need to understand that. We live literally on thin ice, in the sense that one crack in that ice could take us down. And so we don't have the luxury of generating a huge workforce through births. We're too dependent now on saying, well, we need people to commute up here or move up here. Well, so first thing they say, well, where am I going to live? So there's a lot of issues, and we're kind of treading around on these issues when I think they're all interrelated. We need to start looking at these things holistically rather than in their little compartments, because they're all interconnected somehow. We're going to have to figure out this issue of workforce, because not everybody's going to drive an hour from Green Bay up here, particularly in the winter, for a job. They're just not going to do it. And so when you say, well, we want you to live here, it's like, okay, show me where I can live. Show me where there's an apartment that doesn't have a waiting list. So, we have all these issues. Again, all those issues, I've seen it since I've been here. I started on March the 2nd, which was a wonderful time to start an economic development job. I've seen it on other issues. Well, I don't have any impact on that, or that's somebody else's responsibility. It's DCEDC's responsibility, or it's the manufacturers, or it's a city, or it's a county. We got to quit compartmentalizing these issues, because everybody's got or should have a voice at the table in finding those innovative, creative solutions. And I'm saying that those issues aren't going to be resolved by the same worn out, tired strategies we've used for literally decades. They're just not going to, because there'll be a group of people sitting around something that's much better than Zoom, probably, if we ever get back together again and can actually shake hands with each other and have a drink together.
Steve, I'm gonna just cut you off for a minute,
Sure.
okay? Because we've got two folks who have raised their hands now.
Go ahead.
So Jane and then Alexis.
Okay. I'm Jane Wise, and have been volunteering for about 5 or 6 years at the Northern Door Children's Center, and actually have been working there as a substitute since last September, because we don't have enough teachers for one reason or another throughout the year. But I wanted to agree with something that Marjorie said, and that when you, Mr. Jenkins, said that it's up to us, that, you know, no one's going to solve this. I kind of bristled a little bit, because I do feel it's a national issue, and that our people hate to hear the word tax, but I feel like as we have public education, we need to have public early childhood care. And in the long run, it will save money in many, many ways, I feel. If we're addressing those first 3 years, and even the first 5 years, the first 10 years, the social emotional health is just as important as the academic health. And we will fix a lot of our societal problems, I think, if we have a better social emotional foundation for our children. So I don't know, I'm not an economist, I don't know a lot at all really about the tax structures and the things that go on in Door County, but I know there's a room tax that is charged to tourists mostly. And I feel, and we have a number of, and I'm one of them, senior citizens. I happen to live here year round, but I know a lot of our senior citizens live here around 6 months, and then they move to Florida or wherever for 6 months. And a lot of our tourists have been big contributors to our community foundation when we started having issues with COVID. I would hope that maybe there's a way, and I know that I'm going to back off a little bit. I read an article quite a long time ago about Vancouver, and they were having a terrible issue with housing. And they implemented a tax on people who don't live there full time, but had residents, and they were, you know, renting them out, just as a lot of people are doing here, and more so now is what I've heard. That went for a housing trust of sorts, so that people who are providing services could live in Vancouver instead of having to drive, as we said, you know, an hour from Green Bay. So I would hope that we could think about those kinds of things. I'm willing, and many people are willing to help their community, but we cannot do this alone. I think it has to be a national appointment of effort to provide funds for this. And my other thing that I've thought about, and I don't know how possible it is within the county. I'm not sure how we would do it at home care, but I like the idea of a graduated fee. You know, we have, as you said, all kinds of income levels sending children to childcare. And we have the person earning $10 an hour, and we have the person earning $30 or $40 an hour, perhaps. Right now, you know, they pay the same fee per child. We do have scholarships. We have, you know, things to help people who need that financial help, but I would hope it could look at some of those kind of things also. And I'll pass.
Steve, any comments before Alexis joins?
Well, totally agree with you relative to it's a national issue. But if you look at our national politics over the last 2 decades, we can't get anything done. We can't get agreement on anything. And so there's a general opinion across the nation that if we're going to make things happen, we have to start at the local level, because solutions really the innovative solutions are coming from the local level. They're not coming from state and national levels. And so start local and build toward a more statewide or national perspective about this, because we can't get agreement on anything anymore. And I don't see that changing, even if we have a different president in the White House. I don't see it changing. We're at a deadlock in DC, and I don't know if that's ever going to change in short term.
Alexis.
Thank you. Hi, Steve. Thanks for being here tonight. So just a little bit about me. My husband and I are transplants from Green Bay. We have oh God, he's almost 3. We have an almost 3-year-old. Holy. So we were hit with COVID and childcare, and we've been through the whole ringer. And I want to touch on a comment that, I'll use Jane's word, bristled me when you said that 2 incomes are needed to do the things you want to do. And my perspective is our 2 incomes are to survive. We are fortunate not to live necessarily paycheck to paycheck, but we are in that category of a $200, $300, $400 expense. And I don't know. I don't know what we do. Sorry. Got emotional. And I'm also fortunate enough to sit on Door County Board for Sturgeon Bay. So I'm here as a mom, as somebody needing childcare, and as somebody that's looking for real public solutions to these issues. So I guess I think that's all the comments I wanted to make. I have lots of comments, but those are my main ones. But I have questions that are coming up. And from your perspective, what do you think the business sector would be able to chew on? If we were to ask the businesses in the manufacturing, especially in Door County, to contribute to this conversation, in your work and in your experience, what do you think would be a reasonable solution for them to contribute? And then to Jane's point, what models do you see for public dollars to funnel into the current business model? One thing I struggle with as county board and wanting to go through the budget process and see public dollars helping these businesses, whether it's a center or it's in homes, there's just not the infrastructure necessarily there. I've seen a couple models, various success, but is that something that DCEDC is looking into and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that I want to go back to one of your comments about the 2 earner households. The majority of the people that we talk about with 2 earner households aren't there earning 2 incomes because they want luxuries. They're there to make it, to make sure their children have what they would like for them to enjoy in life. So I didn't in any way want to infer anything but that, because 2 earner households have become norm in America for a lot of reasons. I think trying to get the employers to the table is a little more problematic. We just had a conversation today with employers about workforce issues. And the whole purpose was for them to engage in that conversation relative to some things that could provide some relief, and they sat silent for their own reasons. Many of them don't want to talk about issues that are in their shop in front of their colleagues, so they just stay silent. I think trying to, and this where a master facilitator is absolutely critical, because you've got to have them at the table, and they've got to be able to understand this point I was making about it's our problem. It's not someone else's problem. It means it's their problem too. And so it's not just an issue here, it's an issue in every community I've been in, is trying to get the employers to the table outside of their everyday focus on making sure their operation is running like it's supposed to be. When they start talking about those issues on the fringes that does have an impact, those do have impacts, they don't want to talk about that. And so that's a tough nut to crack. Again, I've heard too many of them say that's not my problem. Well, it really is your problem, and sometimes you have to say it that bluntly. You may not think it's a problem, but it is, and let me tell you why. And we need your voice, and we need your financial support for finding solutions to this. And so that's a tough one. And I don't have a magic bullet to that one at all. And I've tried for 46 years to bring many of them to the table, and it's really tough. Now you may get some, but you won't get the majority that you need at the table to solve the problem. The only time I saw this work was in Colorado, where the companies in the industrial park built a child care center in the industrial park and financed the operation of that, so that the employees in the industrial park had a place to drop their kids off. They could go see their kids at lunch. But that was a big financial commitment, not just in the short term of building a facility and hiring staff, but running and operating it long term. But they saw that as a benefit, and most of them would say the calculations show I'll pay for this. My ROI on this is worth the expenditure. But not everybody thinks that way. And so if I could answer your question and say this is a solution, I'd write a book and retire, but I can't do that. And so the models, you know, I say this many times, and it's true for a lot of different issues. You know, we sometimes look at, let's say, well, community A did this and they did it very successfully, and therefore let's do that. Well, that would be like, and I've seen this happen too many times, and most of them fail, because it would be like me, who weighs 250 pounds, you know, getting a suit from somebody that weighs 150 pounds and expect it to fit. It's just not going to do it. And I think sometimes we try to say, well, if it works someplace else, it'll work here. This is where best practices misses a point. Best practices, as long as you understand the circumstances that created the success. And so I always, when people say, well, let's look at best practices, you're talking about bristling. I bristle on that one because I've seen it fail so many times. You have to look at what your local circumstances are, what your corporate circumstances is, and craft something that meets those needs and meets that environment, because otherwise you run the risk of being frustrated. Because what happened in company A or community A is not working in my community or in my company. And so we start all over. And so I believe this to be the case. You have to know what you're up against locally before you can solve the problem, and do it in a way that meets your needs and not somebody else's needs. And you might be able to take bits and pieces, but you can't take the whole thing and expect it to work.
And I will add to that in thinking about getting business community buy-in, one way to think about it is sort of an exemplar participant or a gatekeeper, right? So if we've got somebody who's relying on a younger workforce, the issue with a lot of the manufacturing businesses, it's an older workforce, so their vision only goes so many years out. So they aren't dealing with the problem yet, and they don't understand the ramp up time. That at the time you all of a sudden get your younger workforce in, we can't in 3 months have a new childcare solution. But people who have a longer vision, people who are relying on a younger workforce, that's your entry point to help start to garner some business momentum. And so getting the word out about, or thinking about, do you have that opening? I'd love people to come to these meetings with ideas about that. Email me, Amy, Steve, about those things. The other thing is that I believe you have to have parallel paths. Going to Jane's point about national, I agree, the national conversation is really important, but once again, the time frame on that is so long term. That doesn't mean you can't drop it, but that means you've got to be working short term, and you can think of that as a bridge to your long term, but you've got to be working them at the same time. So we can't just say, in my opinion, it's a national issue and therefore we have to wait for the national solution. We need to work on the local short-term solutions, and hopefully those will be a bridge. We can't rely on that, but that's one way to get people to see reduced risk in these things. We have to do this for the time being. We'll build it, we'll develop it, and at the same time, we've got another thing we're working on. So just the fact of being able to get a community conversation, get a certain level of community collaboration, that in and of itself, in my opinion, would be an innovative step. Okay, so we often think of innovation as a particular thing, plug and play, a program that we apply. I think just being able to reach that level of coordination, interesting enough, in my mind, would be innovative.
You know, we're working on a project right now on the affordable housing side where we hope to be selected as a pilot community that forces us as a community to step outside of the norm, out of the traditional method of solving affordable housing, and it forces us into looking for innovative solutions that are workable, that are achievable, rather than just saying, well, let's do it the way we've always done it. And that doesn't work. I mean, we are driven by grants and by tax credits and so forth. And that's really a gamble whether or not you're going to win in that environment or not.
We've got about 5 minutes. I don't know if other people have just been happy to listen or if people have been waiting to jump in. Amy, you want to go ahead and say something?
Marjorie just put in the chat that she has a question.
Oh, thank you.
I was curious, Steve, with broadband, early childhood education, childcare, and affordable housing, what, if any, data exists about reasons people either didn't accept a job or left a job due to one of those three life impacting issues limiting their life?
That's an excellent question, and the answer to that is there's no data. It's anecdotal at best. Yeah, you once in a while you'll have some information from an individual, but you won't have that data that you absolutely need in order to make quality decisions, because it's data that we haven't gathered and no one's thought about gathering it. It goes back to this conversation. What do we need first to make good decisions? Well, today it's data. I can tell you that we get a lot of calls from entrepreneurs out of Chicago who want to move up here. And their first question is, where do you have broadband service?
Yep.
That tells me where they're going to live if they move up here. And in most instances, they're looking at Sturgeon Bay. So data, we're really liking in good data, solid data that can help us answer questions and begin to get on the road of solutions.
Are there HR departments that could be tapped to just even get some sort of a
There
baseline?
are. Yeah, we met with 13 of them today.
Awesome.
So there are ways of that data gathering, but you want to make sure that it's systematic,
Right.
that you're gathering data over time also, because things hopefully change for the better, and so that data is going to change, hopefully. Data drives everything today. I mean, literally drives everything. And if you're not gathering it, then it's like groping around in the dark today.
Spencer, you want to go?
Sure. My question is, recently the city set aside about $10,000 to contribute to a child care study in our upcoming budget. I know that's going to be in conjunction with Steve and everything you're doing over there at the Economic Center. And have you seen any, I guess, have you researched anything or found anything in other communities where like a study like that was performed and they got results? Because I know like our housing study that we did a while back has worked wonders at the table for economic development with affordable housing. So that, I guess my question is have you seen it work well when we present that type of study to entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and we want to model the child care. And by the way, that's got to be a collaborative approach. And Christina and I talked about this before. We want this to be a collaborative approach and a collaborative study across the platforms that we have in our community that are interested in that issue. And it will be modeled after the housing study. And the reason for that is it gave us data that we could use, and we understood what the challenge looked like and how do we go about that. And the developers love that study because it gives them a head start. And we think the same thing can happen with the child care study. But it's going to take a collaborative effort. It's not just us. We've got one perspective, although I'm trying to broaden that perspective. And I do want to address something, because I think one of the things in this dialogue, we expect other, whether it's employers or other interested parties, to be on the same plane as we are when we're talking about the issue, when they're not. You talk to an employer, their perspective is a whole lot different than someone that's in the childcare industry itself. And so you have to understand each party and where they're coming from, because if you don't, it'll be like ships passing in the dark and we never get to see each other. And so I think one of the issues going forward, whether it's childcare or anything else, is understand the perspective of those that you're asking to the table to help you solve a problem. Because if you don't understand that, then the communication is going to be lacking.
And I just want to jump in for a minute. I know it's a minute after 7. I want to be respectful of Steve's time. If you're willing to hang on for a little bit, that's fine.
Sure.
You have to go. If other people need to leave, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining. And if you've got continued questions, email them to me, because we are doing these town hall meetings every 2 weeks. And so the point is to build and develop the conversations. We don't have to have silos of each week. And so your thoughts on questions to follow up on, speakers, people to bring to the table, email us that, and I will work on keeping things moving forward. But otherwise, so if anybody has to log off, that's fine, but we can at least continue the conversation for another 5 minutes or so, if you're okay with that, Steve.
It's fine for me.
Corey?
Steve, I'm with the Department of Health and Human Services for the county. I'm the deputy director there. And we see childcare from multiple perspectives and see the crisis situation that we're in, I would say. Certainly the families that we serve struggle to find affordable childcare. But as an employer, we see the impact too. So I came to the county 5 years ago, and I would say for most of our jobs, we easily had 20 to 30 applicants. And now we're lucky if we have 4 or 6. And then we whittle it down to those with the qualifications, and we usually have 2 or 3. And we've lost a number of employees that have left because of childcare issues. We do attract a younger workforce a lot of times, because of our pay scale for one, but we tend to attract social workers and case managers that are fresh out of college, and they may come here for their first job, but then when they get a little bit older and decide to start a family, they will leave to go to a bigger community where there is better housing options, affordable childcare, higher paid jobs. So we've seen that again and again, and it's becoming more and more of an issue for us. I do think that it's really critical that we start to gather data on that. We, as a department, we set a goal to start gathering data on the employees that had left over the past few years, and we were going to compile that just before COVID hit and some of our attentions were turned elsewhere. But I think we also need to gather it on the reasons that people don't come across all of the sectors. And I think it's important that we try to get manufacturers to the table, but that we think about all employers in this community. You know, the county's one of the largest employers, the hospital, the education system. So we need to survey them as well, because the issues might be somewhat different, but there's definitely some overlap. And I don't know what the answer is to establish that public-private partnership that you talk about. I think it absolutely will take that. But getting the right people to the table in both sectors, I think, will be a challenge.
Yeah, the manufacturers in our community have a lot of vacancies, and they're growing. There are job openings right now, and they cannot find people. So that the double whammy to that is they have a large proportion of their workforce that are nearing retirement age or are at retirement age. And so the fear of every economic developer, and it's one that we have to be very sensitive to here. If they can't find those workers, they're going to start saying, maybe we ought to move to the Fox Valley, where we have a larger universe of workers to draw from. Keep in mind that manufacturing in Door County is the largest contributor to the domestic product, the gross domestic product. It's 20% of the wealth generated in Door County. Some think it's hospitality. Hospitality ranks 4th, believe it or not, in terms of generating wealth. And so if we start losing those manufacturing employees, it's going to have a profound impact on the wealth. And wealth not in a sense of how much money you have in your billfold, but the corporate wealth in the community that contributes to the United Way, that contributes to the foundation, that contributes to the Girls and Boys Club. That, if we lose that, then we have lost a lot. And I will tell you, if we lose them, it's because of workforce, the lack of a workforce. And again, that's a complex issue, because if you're asking somebody to move here, then they got to struggle to find housing. And then if they have children, they have to struggle to find daycare. So it becomes a really trifecta of issues that affect them. And so we have to be very sensitive to all those issues and moving parts. But that's the reason childcare is an economic development issue.
Now, we shifted our Brady Bunch screen because of people coming in and out. And I thought earlier, someone on this side of my screen, Chad, it might have been you. Did you have your hand raised earlier? No, not Chad. And Jane, you just had your hand raised, but anybody else, we'll go to Jane next, but if somebody had something else they want to say, just jump in. Jane, you're on mute.
So Steve, are these manufacturers the group that you said you met with some of them today and they were kind of silent?
Yeah.
Is that the same group? So, and also, are those the people whose perspective we need to understand?
I think so. I will tell you that, and it's not just manufacturing. They get insular into their own little world, and complicating all that is this little thing called COVID, and then they got a workforce shortage. They're trying to fill positions and so forth. So they get to this, they become inwardly focused, and they don't understand all the things that are revolving around them that affect what they do. And so it comes down to understanding and being sensitive to all of those issues. You know, you have to be pretty patient with the manufacturers because they are a tough bunch to work with, whether it's here or anyplace else. They're hard to bring to the table because they're so busy. I mean, most manufacturing today in America is producing twice the amount of products that they were prior to COVID. That's hard. It's counterintuitive, but that's what's happening. And so they're doing it with fewer and fewer people. Now, some of them obviously are replacing people with automation. Maybe I shouldn't say people. They're replacing missing skills with automation. We have plenty of people, they just don't have the skills, which is a whole nother issue. And so what's their choice? To survive, it's to automate. And so here we go with this kind of a spiral when the more you automate, and it's not happening in just manufacturing, it's happening in a lot of sectors. And then on top of that, as artificial intelligence advances and it's integrated with automation, before long, and I had a CEO one time tell me, Steve, if I could operate in the dark, I would, which means no people. Complete automation from beginning to end. The lights come on only when the robot breaks down. And that's the goal. And it's even more so today. But all those issues, we can't look at them anymore as being an issue over here and an issue over there. They are connected, and we have to understand that connection.
And are you working with the housing trust group that has been formed?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. In fact, they hopefully will be a party if we're successful in becoming a pilot community. They are a part of that team.
So unless anyone has any pressing questions, once again, I love the discussion, and I hope that people carry this forward to the next town hall meeting and spread the word to your friends that this really is an ongoing conversation and Q&A, and we're looking for community input and also the questions that come across that are on people's minds. So spread the word. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Steve, so much for your time and your thoughts and sharing your experience with us. Invaluable. And
I would say if anybody wants to contact me, my email address is simple. It's steve@doorcountybusiness.com. And so if you have a comment, if you think about something and you want to pass that along, I relish input from everybody from every sector and every perspective. Please, it's important for us all to look at different perspectives as we move through these various issues.
thank you. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again later.
Christina,
Night.
what is the action